So, welcome to the the National Outreach interview, and we're gonna ask you about 20 questions. We had a list of around that amount, and no particular order, and just feel free to answer however you feel.
Not a problem.
Okay. Um, the first question is, sorry. Obviously, there has been tension, but why? What is the main reason you believe there needs to be change in this nation for racial injustice?
Well, I'm about to say that's a pretty large question. We have to remember that in the United States of America, we've always had a racial injustice issue from the very, very beginning by the way that we have treated the first people who were on this continent, all the way to the way that we currently treat people. And we've never redressed those issues. So first, we've never redressed the issue of taking land from the Native Americans and indigenous people of this land. Then, when it came to African Americans, we never redressed the issue of the enslavement of Black people, the ill treatment of Black people, the fact that Black people have not been considered full humans. When we started in this country, we were considered property, and then three-fifths of a person only for the purposes of property owning white men. And then when we even were granted full personhood, we were still disenfranchised from this from this world, in terms of not having access to full voting rights, not being able to own property, still being dehumanized through lynching and in other institutional practices. So I think what you're seeing happening now is the collective history and the collective trauma of that coming to the forefront at this very moment, where we're seeing a global pandemic that is disproportionately impacting Black people, police brutality being given even more additional viewership because of the fact that videos are going more viral. We have social media, so more of these incidences are coming to light and are not hidden in a way that we're seeing it is a systemic and global problem. So there has been a need for change. There's always been a need for change. It's just that at this moment, because of the fact that we're seeing so many different things coming together, that is what is necessitating and making people more active and aware, because they have no ability to be able to look in any other direction. But it's always been there, the need for us to change.
Yeah, that's actually a very nice description. So thank you for that. The second question is also extremely broad, but if you can give us a general gist, what can be done to change the thinking of people against minorities?
Once again, that's of course very broad, and I completely understand the need for the question. Um, First and foremost, it has to be individuals doing the work, individuals taking on the responsibility that they need to change the preconceived notions that they have. And they need to challenge the thinkings that they've had about different people. So if you grew up with family members who had negative views of Black people, or negative views of Native Americans, negative views of Latinx, Latino folks, you need to question, well, where did that come from and why do you hold these beliefs? Because you don't have to hold those same beliefs. So it's inherent upon you, if you are really about seeing the humanity of individuals, that you make the change yourself. And first it comes from the recognition of where do these ideas come from. And then doing that own internal work of getting to a place where you're seeing the systemic oppressions that are going on, and saying that you are not okay with the world operating in that way. And then at an individual level, once again, making those challenges. So challenging your workplace to being a better environment for Black and brown folk, challenging your relatives, your friends, the other people in your community to think about these things in a larger framework and to challenge once again their negative preconceived notions and challenging and changing those preconceived notions. So to me, it first and foremost starts with an individual level, but then again, it then goes from a systemic level. So we have to think about it in those ways of first at the individual level, but then also making that systemic level. And then, I'm trying to see, I think I see something in the chat, but that's at least where I would think about it just in terms of from a broad perspective is that we got to make the change that we want to see in the ways that we even think and relate to one another.
Yeah, I think that they were just trying to say, obviously we are or not obviously, but we are minorities, and even though there uh, really hasn't been as much oppression, that's kind of a question that, how do I say, anyways. The next question is, why has racism, police brutality, and violence been so mainstream this year? Not mainstream, but important and become a lot larger than the previous years.
Well, once again, the reason why I think we're seeing more attention to it this year is because of the sheer number of incidences that are going on. And then on top of that, we're going through a global pandemic. So think of it this way. Before this pandemic, we had the ability to just go about our lives, move about freely, things of that nature. You didn't have that kind of focused attention that unfortunately the global pandemic is now forcing us all to make because we're in our homes. We're in front of social media more. We're in front of media more. We're in front of the news more. So because of that, we can't divert our attention because the global pandemic has kind of forced us to not be able to do so in the ways that people were able to do previously. So I think for that reason, you're seeing more attention because you can't divert your attention in other ways. Second of all, we are seeing, unfortunately, an increase of these incidences in a lot of different metropolitan areas and in various other areas. So that's also causing more increased attention because surely it's happening more. And then third and finally, once again, because of social media and because of the fact that people have the ability to be able to video cam these incidences more because of a wider availability of smartphones and phones with cameras, that's given the ability for there to be more perspectives, more of these incidences to be brought to light, where previously you didn't have those other devices and things of that nature to record these incidences, and all you had was just the police account. And then specifically, I want to bring attention to George Floyd's particular case. We had a situation very similar to George Floyd in the Eric Garner case, where he was a man in the New York area who died because of an illegal chokehold. He literally was shouting, "I can't breathe." People were filming it. The police officer knew he was being filmed, and that man still died. Well, here we are now, years later, with a similar instance in which a man is on the ground, an illegal chokehold or an illegal procedure is used, someone is shouting, "I can't breathe," multiple people are filming it, and he is directly looking into the camera and not changing his behavior. So I think one of the other reasons for why you're seeing more of an amplification is because we've been through this before. All the cries for changes, all the promises for more procedures, more training, things of that nature. If all that really happened, then this incident with George Floyd should not have happened. And it clearly did happen. So once again, the same old rhetoric and the same old promises of change are not going to be resonant because we're continuing to see the same behavior. So I think all of those are some of the reasons for why you're seeing what's going on being more heightened this time around.
Okay. Um, the next question was, what has Black Lives Matter Houston done in the past to help end racism and make less, how do I say this, institutional racism and racism in the workplace and other places?
Well, Black Lives Matter Houston does a variety of different things. Our first and foremost goal is to be a support for the Black community of Houston. So we have been in existence since 2013. Since that time, we have hosted protests, rallies, and marches in response to incidences related to police brutality here in the city of Houston. During Hurricane Harvey, we physically gutted homes. We helped provide shelter. We helped provide food. We also provided school supplies for a variety of different school districts in and around the area. During the coronavirus, we've also had coronavirus response where we've been able to provide direct support to families impacted by the coronavirus. We provide PPE. We also provide various other services. We advocate for educational changes because there are educational inequalities. We deal with food insecurity by helping to feed the homeless. So all these issues are connected because they all come from a devaluation of Black life. And so what we try to do is to make sure that first and foremost that Black lives matter, period, and that everybody knows that Black lives matter. And then we provide support to our community to once again demonstrate that our lives matter, but also to show the interconnectedness of all these issues because we need to have all these issues to be addressed so that we're not continuously having to deal with police brutality. We're not continuously having police being called out due to issues that come from lack, being the fundamental issues such as a lack of educational opportunities, a lack of food security, that then leads to mental health, which then leads to cops coming out and being called in those situations. So that's the reason why you have to look at all the interconnectedness of all these different issues, and that's what we try to do is to address all these different issues in a variety of different ways.
A follow-up question on that is, so you said that Black Lives Matter Houston has done protests in the past.
Mhm.
So I'm assuming they're peaceful, but how do you feel about the non-peaceful protests? Like, do you think it's a way to bring attention to the matter?
First and foremost, I want to correct something really quickly. Everything that we do as Black Lives Matter Houston is always peaceful, and I don't want to contribute to the stigmatization of protests by calling them peaceful versus non-peaceful protests. I want that to be very, very clear because often what I think happens is that people contribute to the demonization and the stigmatization of protesting by saying the words peaceful protest versus non-peaceful protest. When people inherently protest, it is usually from a place of peace. It is other individuals who usually are operating not in line or aligned to those particular movements that are taking advantage of the situation to then make it into quote unquote non-peaceful protests. So for example, in many of the protests, and there has been a study that has showed this, that 93 to 95% of the protests that have been held along with Black Lives Matter have been quote unquote peaceful, where there have been no other type of escalation, no other type of issues. Those 5% are often done by people who are non-Black, who are taking advantage of the situation to loot, to rob, and things of that nature. And then we unfortunately get negatively characterized with respect to that because they used our actions and what we're trying to do to bring attention to our issues to further aggrandize themselves and to destroy our communities. So that's the only reason for why I just want to be very clear when we talk about that is that we're not contributing to the demonization of protesting by labeling one as being one or the other. People when they protest generally are doing it because they're trying to bring attention to their issues, and they're also trying to do it in a way that gives voice to the community. But what often doesn't get talked about is the fact that police will escalate the situation by the way that they approach those individuals. They approach those individuals wearing riot gear. They approach those individuals from a place of aggression that is not even warranted by the behavior of those individuals who are acting within the protest. And then on top of that, it'll be non-people of color who are acting in aggression, but because they're not automatically perceived to be dangerous or perceived negatively, they're able to operate in that way. But then it's the people of color who get disproportionately penalized, demonized, and punished because of those other actors. So just wanted to say that.
Thank you for clarifying so much. This next question is gonna come from Kathito.
So, other cities with ongoing protests like Seattle, New York, Portland, and Washington, D.C. have Black Lives Matter murals painted. So, are there any plans for one in Houston?
There are already murals that have been painted around the city of Houston. So there is a George Floyd mural, there is a Trayvon Martin mural, and those are just a few of the murals that have already been painted in honor and in remembrance of those individuals. So you will see all across the city of Houston that there are different murals that are bringing attention and are in remembrance of those individuals.
So, like, my main point was like about a street mural. So, like the one painted in front of the Trump Tower in New York.
So there is already a Black Lives Matter street mural that has been painted here in the city of Houston. It is a little bit on the north side and close to being outside of Houston, but it is here in the city of Houston area. As far as plans for one to be more in the general downtown area and things of that nature, currently I'm not sure of any particular plans. We are always open to helping with those particular plans. But for us, we're really more about the we're really more about the systemic changes rather than the symbolic changes. And so those murals are good in terms of, once again, honoring, symbolizing, and remembering those individuals and the issues. But we're more about working on what are the actual systemic changes rather than putting in one other symbol.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying again, actually. Um, so kind of to ask more on that, what are the goals of Black Lives Matter Houston?
The
Which,
goal, first and foremost, is that we are creating racial equity here in the city of Houston. And what I mean by that is that we want to see an end of the systemic oppressions, the disproportionate negative impacts of the system harming Black life. So for us, that would mean an end to police brutality. That would mean an end to food insecurity. That would mean an end to educational inequalities that disproportionately and negatively impact Black students from K through 12 education as well as in higher education. So it's an end to all of those things that is creating an equitable society where we all have a part to play. We all have equal access to opportunities, and we all feel beneficial to what happens to each and every one of us. So that to us is one of our central goals.
So, I'll be asking the next question. So, what are your beliefs on all lives matter?
So here's the thing. Black Lives Matter is a simple declarative statement. Just that. There should be no but, there should be no and, nothing else against that. When we say that, the reason why we say that is because, once again, there is a fundamental devaluation of Black life that has been inherent in the United States of America since the beginning of this country. So when individuals say that particular statement, they are engaging in that devaluation of Black life. They are contributing to that to suggest that Black lives are not equal. Because if that statement was true, we would not be seeing all the negative and all the disproportionate and systemic problems that impact Black people if that statement was true. So, respectfully, when anyone ever says that to me, Black lives, no one could ever say that until Black lives truly matter in the United States of America and we see this world moving into that direction. And on top of that, when we say all Black Lives Matter, the reason for why we say that particular phrase is because we're being fully inclusive of everybody who self-identifies as Black. That when we say that, we are talking about Black women. We are talking about Black trans people. We're talking about Black trans women. We are talking about all of us who are disproportionately marginalized and harmed by this country because of our race. So definitely, when anyone ever says that, they are being disrespectful.
okay, thank you. and this is actually we're halfway through. The 10th question is the ninth question, the 8th question. I was mislooking. How has Black Lives Matter Houston influenced young leaders to stand up and speak out?
So we empower young leaders all across Houston and all around the world to speak up and to do what they feel is needed in their own communities. So we have spoken directly to students in schools. We have empowered them to start up their own activism within their schools. If they see policies that they want changed, we encourage them to go speak before their school leaders, to go speak before their school boards, and make sure they demand change. We work with various different activist organizations that are connected directly to youth. We've worked with March for Our Lives. We've worked with the Sunshine Organization. We've worked with various other youth. So we're always encouraging youth activism to continue going forth because this is about all of us working collectively together to see the change that we want to see in the world. So you can be your best advocate. You have your voice, and it's about using your voice in the best and most effective ways. So we help youth and we help students to find just the best way to do that.
Okay. The next question is again a follow-up, or ninth. Sorry.
It's
Are there
okay.
any are there any other organizations that you partnered with?
So primarily Black Lives Matter Houston operates under a partnership model, which means that we work with individuals and organizations to address various issues. So there are a number of different organizations that we work with, currently are working with, and are always open to working with different individuals. So in terms of food insecurities, we've worked with Food Not Bombs, which specifically provides support for the homeless population. When it comes to education, we've worked with a Safe Harbor Schools Collective. We've also worked with a variety of different other organizations when it comes to specifically dealing with education issues in K through 12 education, but also in higher education. Like I mentioned, we've worked with March for Our Lives Houston. We've worked with Indivisible Houston, the Texas Organizing Project, Pure Justice. So we work with a variety of different organizations and a variety of different individuals who are deeply committed to addressing the issues here in Houston for the Black community.
Okay. And the next question is there anything specifically during the COVID-19 pandemic that Black Lives Matter Houston has done, maybe help the community or anything, especially during this pandemic?
So as I had mentioned a little earlier, as soon as COVID-19 started impacting Houston, Black Lives Matter Houston immediately went into providing a coronavirus response. So we issued a response to the governor that he needed to specifically designate more resources, specifically targeted to the Black community, given the fact that we could see this was going to disproportionately impact us as a community. We also provided individual response in the form of providing gift cards to families that were impacted during coronavirus in terms of who had families who lost their jobs, who were furloughed and needed additional support. We've also provided PPE and other protective gear specifically to the Black community. We provided water when we saw water shortages. So we've always been there where we provide immediate support and mutual aid directly to our community when we see that we're the ones who are going to be disproportionately and negatively impacted.
And the so around after uh, George Floyd died, 60,000 people gathered. Sorry, 60,000 people gathered in downtown Houston in honor of him. So did that help to bring more awareness to racism in Houston, or did it impact the prevention of racism?
So here's what I will say about that particular action. So it was close to 60,000 individuals who came out in support of George Floyd's family and of the Houston community. What I feel that that particular event did was it helped, first off, to bring community together. Because that's one of the important things that I think people need to understand when it comes to protests, marches, and rallies is that one element of that is about community building and for the community to come together in solidarity. So I feel that that particular protest and that particular action helped do that in terms of it brought a lot of people together. I also felt that it did bring a lot of attention to George Floyd's particular case, but also to the fact that we once again have a systemic problem when it comes to the way that Black lives are valued and treated in this country. Now, my hesitation is that that was one action. This is not just a moment. This is a movement. This is continuous. This is an issue that we are continuously having to address. And a lot of people were activated at that moment, but where have they been since then? And where are we going to see them 6 months from then? If people are truly about this, they need to be continuously activated and not just going to one action where it's easy to take a selfie, take a photo, or something of that nature with a lot of other people and say, hey, I'm in support. What are you doing at the individual level to really make a change? Are you having these important conversations with other members of your community to really talk about how do we view Black people? How do we treat Black people? Are we really doing things to stand in the gap to make things better for Black people in this country? Or are you only going to do it because it's popular and it's easy to show support because there's 60,000 other people who are aligned in that way, and you're doing it because you want to be aligned with those individuals rather than being the odd person out? So once again, it was great in terms of showing solidarity. I think it brought a lot of attention to the issues. But the thing is that how activated are those 60,000 plus people and the rest of society going to be 6 months from that, from now, when we're still dealing with police brutality, we're still dealing with injustices that are targeted towards the Black community, and we're still dealing with racism in the United States.
So during the George Floyd protest, many cities were experiencing a lot of riots and violence. How come Houston didn't experience that much?
The reason being is because once again, we came in a spirit of we are here for community. We came here in a spirit of it's about the family. It's about bringing attention to the issue. And once again, you have to think about in those particular areas, in those particular situations, who exactly was engaging in that behavior. Many of those individuals were not affiliated with Black Lives Matter, with the actual movement itself, with the actual protests or rallies itself. So I think the reason for why you didn't see that here in Houston is because we came at it with that spirit of this is about community. This is about uplifting the name of George Floyd. This is about uplifting the issue. It wasn't something that was further away. You know, George Floyd was a member of the Houston community, so that deep connection to the city was already there. And so I think that that helped to be a difference in what you saw happening in Houston than what you saw happening in other places. And also, it's going to be very different depending on that particular community's relation to the police department and also how the police departments approach those individuals because we had issues here in Houston. I definitely don't want to gloss over that. We definitely had issues because of the way that the police approached individuals who were just trying to exercise their right to protest out against these issues, but also to be in community with other members of the community.
So what about the racism in the other counties that make up Houston? So for example, Fort Bend, Katy, Cypress, Matagorda, and Montgomery.
What do you mean?
So Houston itself is a metro, kind of like a metro city. All the counties make up it.
Correct.
you really see that it's mainly just focusing on Houston itself, but like, what about the other communities too?
We focus on the entire Houston area. So we work with various other counties, and you still will see issues of racism in those counties as well. So we work with those other counties as well, and we help to address, once again, the Houston area and the issues of racism and the issues of police brutality in this area. So those are also addressed by us as well.
Okay, and I'm gonna go back to starting the questions now. Um, there's been lots of variation over this, but what do you what are your views on police budget? Some people are saying again, keep the police budget. Some are saying completely take away the police budget. What are your and Black Lives Matter Houston's views?
So what I will say is that we are in favor of defunding the police that will lead to the abolishment of the police. So I know a lot of people are confused by what does that mean. What that means is this. The police currently are asked to respond and deal with a lot of issues that they should not be dealing with and that they're not really adequately trained to deal with. One of those main issues is with respect to mental illness. So when an individual is going through an episode of mental illness, generally the only individuals that are able to go and respond to those issues currently are going to be police. So they will get called out. They will be dealing with someone who's dealing with a mental health issue at that particular moment. What do they have access to? They have access to guns. They have access to tasers. They're not necessarily trained in the way to de-escalate the situation. And often they escalate the situation by calling in more police officers to where it is now 22 individuals dealing with one person who's in a span of dealing with mental health, and it's 22 guns pointed at one person. Is that effective? No, it is not. So when we say defund the police, what we mean is that we need to take the resources that are being allocated to police officers to deal with these issues to then go to other resources that could be a better way of actually addressing these issues. So when it comes to mental health, we need more mental health trained individuals to respond to these to respond to these incidences. So instead of having to call a police officer, you can call a trained psychiatrist who can come out into that situation and be able to talk through someone who's dealing with a mental health issue. It means also dealing with the fact that we need more homeless shelters so that way we are able to address once again, the lack of resources that our homeless community is dealing with so that we don't have police officers who are going and having to, negatively impact that community. It means, addressing the need for we need more domestic violence shelters and more resources to address that. So that's why when we say defund the police, it means we need a reallocation of those resources towards more appropriate resources that are not based on a systemically racist system. And the other reason for why we have to abolish the police system is once again going back to history. As we mentioned, the history of policing is something people need to be very, very made aware of. Policing, especially as it started in the United States, the first forms of police officers were slave catchers. So inherently, they devalued Black people. And that is a culture that perpetuates itself. Even when you add new police officers who are of a different race, even if you give them racial training and things of that nature, the fundamental culture of police culture has always been anti-Black. So we need a new system that is not based in that anti-Blackness. So when you abolish the system, you get a chance to reimagine a new form of policing and a new form of protection because several research has been out there to show police really do not deter crimes. Police really do not protect us in every single situation. And more than not, they're protecting property than they're protecting people. So those are all the reasons for why we need a new system and one that is not rooted and based in anti-Blackness.
A lot of critics are replying to that or that message that sorry, if we took away the police for the time that there was no police, anybody could commit a crime and not essentially, they would still be out there. If if somebody, let's say, murdered somebody else, they would still be out there. Is that how, like, what would you say to that?
So here's the thing. I think we need to make it very, very clear that can police really prevent murder? No. If someone is going to unfortunately kill somebody, unfortunately, more than likely, they're probably going to go through with it, irrespective of a police officer. So that's one thing. But secondly, when we talk about this, it is a matter of, once again, defunding that leads to abolishment. These things can happen simultaneously to where you are changing the system, keeping the current system in place, but also reimagining a new system. So often when I tell people the way that they're thinking about it, I challenge them to reimagine how they're thinking about that particular process. Generally, no one is saying, boop, it's gone. We go into a new system because unfortunately, that's just not a really workable situation. But you can defund and de-escalate the current system while reimagining and rebuilding a new system simultaneously.
Okay. I think they may have wanted to do this. No. Okay. So, do you believe that there's still systemic racism in Houston? If so, how do I say this? How bad is it? Is it still as bad as it was some years ago?
Systemic racism is pervasive across the entire United States. It's bad everywhere. We still are dealing with the systemic racism problem all around the world. We're still dealing with the systemic racism problem here in the city of Houston. We're seeing that by, once again, the way that Black people are disproportionately targeted. We're seeing that with the fact that we still have food insecurity. We're seeing that in the fact that we still have COVID-19 is disproportionately impacting us negatively. So very much systemic racism is very much still in existence all around the United States. And you still will see that here in Houston because we still need changes at the systemic level. Why are we not seeing more resources being allocated to the Black community when it comes to COVID-19? Why are we not seeing changes in funding to where Black and brown schools are not being disproportionately impacted and negatively impacted? Why are we not seeing those same resources being allocated to our schools to where education is going to be the same and not unequal? So yes, we still definitely have a systemic racism problem all around the United States, but also here in Houston.
Okay.
So,
Oh, sorry.
in many instances, chief of police has been very vocal about the support for this cause. Do you see him as an ally to end racial injustice?
I do not want to answer that question.
Thank you. The next question. By the way, we are close to ending. Going back to the wait. Oh, sorry. One second. Going back to the All Lives Matter question. Black lives are obviously have had more racial injustice happen to them, but do you think other minorities such as Asians, Hispanics, Native Americans um, also face some injustice, even if it's a lot less? And how bad do you think it is?
I think so I want to challenge the question for a moment.
Okay.
And the reason why I want to challenge the question is because of the question of how bad is it? I think that's where the problem comes in. This is not about comparing. You know what I mean? This is not saying one is worse than the other because I think that that's where the problems come in is that we end up engaging in oppression Olympics rather than seeing that it's all rooted in the same problem. And the root of that problem is racism. The root of that problem is the fact that why are we being judged by standards that don't have us centered and that don't have us in mind? So we are all judged negatively because we're not the standard by which it was created. Now, to me, that's where the problem comes in, is that when we start comparing, we're not seeing the similarities and coming together to say, hey, anti-blackness is a problem. We need to change that. And even though I'm not a black person, I need to be and operate from an anti-racism standpoint, because me as a person of color, I'm also dealing with racism. I'm also dealing with a history of oppression in this country because we were not the individuals who were centered at the start of this country. So therefore, I need to see that if the improvement of black people happens, it's going to have an improvement for all of us. Rather than saying, oh, I am benefiting from this system, and because I'm receiving benefits from this system, I therefore want to maintain that and not challenge the negativity and the negativeness that is happening to black people. So that's the reason for why I just want to challenge the question, in the fact that we shouldn't be looking at this from a comparison. What we should be looking at is, this country is founded on racism. That racism impacts all of us who are people of color in the United States. And therefore, we should be invested in changing that system, rather than feeling we need to get closer and closer to a proximity that doesn't center us.
We actually finished all the questions. Those are all the questions we have for you today.